Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So I wanted to, it's 7 o'clock. I think we should be like, we'll do a little kind of that fashionably late thing. We'll give them a couple of minutes to get here. But while we do, let me mention a couple of things. First, I'll welcome everybody in a minute. Did everybody hear when you signed on? Could you hear, did it say this session is being recorded? I want to make sure everybody's aware that this
Yes.
session is being recorded. I also wanted to let you know that we published, we talked about whether it was a good idea or not a good idea. We published the link just as, with the confidence that people in Lincolnwood are really cool and really good people, and we don't have to worry about, being Zoom bombed or anything like that. But in the event that there was any kind of inappropriate visual or verbal participation, Ray is at the ready. He's got his finger on the remove button, and they will be ejected from the meeting immediately. So hopefully we won't have any problem with that.
I'll give them the finger.
There you go. I've done everything that I can do in my house to make sure that our connection is solid. So I'm really hoping that we don't have any technical difficulties. And I want to mention a few things for everybody before we give the chief a chance to get started. For anybody who's new to Zoom, there's a few things that I'd like to make you aware of. First of all, my name is Karen, and thank you for being here. You'll see as you look around the screen, if you have everybody on the same screen, you should see Chief Parrott. And what I'm going to suggest is that if you put your cursor over his picture, you will see three little dots to the right. If you open that up and look down on that menu, it'll say Pin Video. He's our guest of honor. I'm going to suggest that you pin his video. It'll come up. He'll be big and in the middle of your screen, and the rest of us will all scatter to other screens. I'm going to suggest that you do that. I think that's a honor. It's a nice thing to do, and that'll give us full attention to our speaker. We also want to be really clear that we're, today, maybe not 6 weeks ago, but today, talking about policing can be controversial. There's a lot going on, and a lot of people have a lot of feelings. It's really, really important to us at Lincolnwood Together that we be able to dialogue, and that our dialogues always be respectful, that we always listen more than we talk, and that everybody feels free to participate. If you would like to participate, some people sent me questions in email. My email was coming in like crazy today. If you want to share a question anonymously, what I would ask you to do is at the bottom of your screen, there's something that says chat. You can open the chat and you can scroll down. I'm going to ask you to scroll down to Raymond Gross. Oh, here, Paula can't get in. So we're going to ask you to scroll in to Raymond Grossman, and you can send a private message to Ray. Ray, I trust you to interrupt at appropriate times and to give us the question, but without telling us who said it, okay? I'll ask you to do that. I would ask everybody to please mute yourself unless you're speaking, and how are you gonna be speaking then? So if you look at the bottom, there's something that says reactions. I think that during the time when the chief is talking, everybody likes to get feedback, right? If you appreciate and you agree with something that he says, in that reaction, you can give him thumbs up. And that'll be kind of cool for the chief, right? He'll see all the screens with thumbs up for anything that you agree with. If you would like to comment, I'm going to ask you to please, in the same place where it says reaction, I'm going to ask you to do the one that's applause. It's the closest looking to like raising your hand. And Ray, Paula just got here, so we can go back to what we had originally agreed. Send that private message to Paula Fuller-Tobin. If you scroll down on the chat, I see somebody said, hello, my husband and I are new to Lincolnwood. Well, welcome. We want you to be part of Lincolnwood Together. So I think those are the things that I wanted to explain. If anybody has a question about any of what I just said, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. I want to be sure that you know what we're doing. So we're going to.
You want me to send a question to Paula if somebody sends me a question?
No, you don't have to do it anymore. They're going to send the question directly to Paula, because you were going to do the removing thing and she was going to handle the chat. So that's what we're going to stick with that.
Oh, thank goodness.
Anybody have any questions?
If the president calls, can I remove him?
Okay, Ray, I'm going to mute you now. If you don't behave, I can do that, all right? Just so you know. All right, I don't see any hands raised. I'm thrilled to see the number of participants. Welcome, everybody. And I don't think this man, well, first I think we should acknowledge that we have one of our village trustees is here tonight, and I just want to acknowledge that Atur Sargon is here. And it is extremely meaningful, I think, to all of us that you would take your time to be with us here tonight, Atur. Really appreciate you, really appreciate your accessibility. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Erin, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. I appreciate your group putting this together. I think it's a very important conversation. I thank our chief for doing it.
Great, thank you so much. So let me tell you that when all this excitement started with the protesting and all the police and the news and everything we were seeing, I kept thinking, I wonder how Chief Parrott's doing. I wonder how Chief Parrott's doing. So I sent him an email, and so amazing, you know, in these days with everything you hear, I got to, first of all, you get a response back within. Mute yourself if you're not talking. Somebody's moving paper and we can all hear you. Please mute yourself during right now. He wrote back within minutes, and we had a lovely conversation, and I thought, why do I just get this? Everybody should get this. And so I said, you know, what do you think? Would you like to participate in an event with the community? And the words you literally, I don't know if you remember you said this, but you said, I'd be ecstatic. And I thought, oh my God, like every township, every place should be so lucky. So our chief of police, no more introduction. This is our chief of police. Chief Parrott, if you would please unmute yourself, and we are here to listen, and then we have some questions.
Well, Karen, I just want to say thank you for the very kind and wonderful introduction. I also have to applaud you for your housekeeping rules that you gave to the participants, because I think that that's extremely important. But I want to be here to share as much information as I can with everybody that's attending this, because this is an important topic, whatever the topic is. It could be something about what's going on now or what's gone on before, how we run the police department, and where we're headed. And I think that that is all things that everybody should be aware about. I just want to say, though, although, you know, we've obviously been through some challenging times together with COVID-19, things are moving in the right direction, which is great. And we didn't expect this other unfortunate incident to happen that's been affecting, obviously, the nation and most of all policing. But I have to say that the residents of Lincolnwood and the businesses have been such a tremendous support to the police department. I feel extremely fortunate to know that the amount of support that we have. And, you know, I just actually, prior to this meeting, and then we had a village board meeting last night prior to those two meetings. We're still working on 12-hour shifts. We're transitioning off of that shortly, but I've been going to the roll calls, talking to the officers. We've been doing outdoor roll calls now, just because try to get away from the electronic roll calls that we were doing as it relates to the COVID-19 issues, and just being face to face and conversing with people and trying to get back to some normalcy. So I just really want to thank everybody for, again, being so supportive and allowing us to serve the village and do it the right way. And that's really what it's all about for here. So I know I recognize some names on the screen. I don't know everybody here, but I do want to get to know everybody as much as possible. I see that Trustee Sargon's here. I know Trustee Sargon and I have conversed often, and she's very open to and very concerned about how we do policing, and we have a very open dialogue, and I appreciate that, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be with everybody. You should know your police department, you should know how we do our job, and you should know that we do it effectively, but also do it lawfully. I really didn't prepare any specific remarks tonight. I'm more prepared to field some questions and talk a little bit about what we're doing and some things that I'm looking at as a chief of police that could could improve the way we do policing here in Lincolnwood. For those that don't know much about me, I'll take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about my background. But I've been in law enforcement as a sworn officer I'm in my 31st year. I did most of my career in Evanston. I retired from Evanston, and after 26 years as a deputy chief, worked in just about every unit within that police department, and have been fortunate enough to come to Lincolnwood for the last 2 years. I grew up not far from here, West Rogers Park, as a matter of fact. Graduated Mather High School, went to Boone Elementary, very familiar with the Lincolnwood area. Spent most of my teenage years driving through Lincolnwood at some point, and just I'm very thankful and happy to be here, working again so close to where I grew up, spending my time in Evanston. I originally started my career working when I was in college. I was working for United States Customs Service, and then became a Naperville police officer for a short time, and realized I wanted to get back closer to home, or closer to my family. So I ended up in Evanston. Like I said, my career was very expansive in Evanston. It's a bigger department, different challenges, but I think it's helped me take on this role here in Lincolnwood, and understanding these challenges now, that a lot of these challenges that we're facing here under the current climate of policing are evolving quickly, and that has helped me understand and move this department forward. I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about use of force with the Lincolnwood Police Department. I know it's I can't say I've coined this term because I haven't, but anytime police officers use force, our objective is to make sure that we do it lawfully and we do it within policy. But use of force, any use of force, it's awful. It looks awful. Awful but lawful is the term that I'm kind of looking at. And it does, whenever you watch use of force, especially on video, and we're all, we live in a video age, and we've even expanded video now that we're doing conference calls on video. It is something that everybody's going to watch, everybody's going to dissect. And I just say that, videos just don't look good sometimes. That doesn't mean that they're not lawful. It just means that some are bad and unlawful, and then some are within the guidelines. So I think that that's important for people to know. But here in Lincolnwood, we have the video systems we have in place for officers are in their car. We have a 2-camera system in each car. It documents every traffic stop, every encounter that happens around the police vehicle. We also have a camera in place in the back, which captures if somebody is taken into custody and transported. The officers are equipped with a microphone. From the time the officer starts responding to a call, or if they stop a car, that conversation is automatically recorded. That's been going on for several years. I'm sure people are aware that a lot of police departments have body cameras. I actually was involved in the body camera program in implementing it in Evanston. I am a fan of body cameras. The one problematic issue with body cameras is it's very, very costly. So costly on not only for the equipment, but to maintain it, and also having a staffing person that can look after it and also deal with any type of FOIA requests that come in related to body cameras. So it's really a full-time position to deal with that. Although I think it's great technology, and I think it protects the officer and it protects the public equally. I've seen many encounters where body cameras have actually saved the officer in terms of trying to explain themselves. And I've seen obviously the bad part where things are recorded where an officer does something they shouldn't do. And if that were to occur, then obviously as a police administrator, we deal with that accordingly. Whether if it's illegal or a violation of policy, we would hold them accountable. It's very similar to what we do now, even with the car cameras. I'm fortunate that in Lincolnwood, we police professionally, and we always ensure that officers police professionally. Are there occasional times when we do get a complaint of an officer? We do, and we investigate it fully. Our policy is that we investigate every complaint that we receive from an officer. That's the best practice, and also that is the way you maintain the trust of the community within the police department. So our use of force, I think we have good policies in place. We just recently redid all our policies in the beginning of 2019. We use a third-party vendor policy platform called Lexipol. Lexipol basically is a policy platform for law enforcement that has not only capabilities of a phone app so officers can look at the current policies of the department and make sure they know them, but Lexipol also ensures that we are practicing within the guidelines of Illinois law and national law, and also what's best practices for law enforcement today. And one nice part about Lexipol that we use is that officers get tests. So they have what's called a daily training bulletin. They get tested basically throughout the month. They'll get notifications, and they usually go in maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks, and they have to take quizzes. They get a scenario, and the scenario applies to the policy. They can reread the policy if they like, and then they have to answer the question, and then they'll get an automatic response if they answer the question correctly or not. And then we have an administrator within the police department that monitors to make sure that every officer completes their daily training bulletins. And then we also belong to another online platform called the Police Law Institute, which requires us to do monthly trainings on, could be new law updates within Illinois and procedures. Sometimes it's federal related, to make sure that we are tested and properly are covering those mandates that we need to have for training. And again, those are a lot of them. It's an online learning system, and then the officers get tested at the end of the readings to make sure that they are compliant and they understand each of those laws as they apply here in Illinois and obviously nationally. Those platforms exist in other states, but obviously different states have different laws as they apply and written. I know that there's been a lot of talk lately, especially national attention towards banning chokeholds. Illinois had enacted legislation a couple of years ago banning chokeholds. Chokeholds are basically banned with the exception of if an officer's defending himself against deadly harm himself. But just in general, an officer cannot grab a hold of somebody and put them in a chokehold. That is banned. So I just wanted to obviously explain that. I feel that we are progressive here in Lincolnwood. We ensure that, again, that our policies are up to date. We routinely check them. We also get updates through Lexipol, but we're also reading any type of legal updates that come through regarding case law to ensure that we are practicing what needs to be within line of policing without creating any liability or extra liability when it comes to our abilities to police in the field, whether it's doing through traffic stops or making arrests, establishing probable cause, handling investigations. I feel that the legislature, when they get back in session, that there'll probably be more of a focus again towards law enforcement accountability and best practices and use of force. That's something that I try to stay on top of. I belong to the Illinois Chiefs Association, and part of my group belonging there is I belong to the legislative group. So I'm very involved in reviewing any type of legislation that comes through that involves police. And I think it's important for the legislators to have a good relationship with them so we can give them both sides of not only what could potentially be good or what could potentially be bad for practicing law enforcement in the field. We want to have a good balance. We want to obviously protect people's rights, but we also want to protect the officer too, and not tie our hands so we cannot do our job. So it's sometimes it is a tough balance, and a lot of reading and a lot of writing sometimes, but it's an enjoyable read most of the time. And I just wanted to share that because I think it's important to know that as my position of the head of the Lincolnwood Police Department, it's my job to make sure that I work with as many people as possible to allow us to police the best way we can. So that being said, I'm kind of looking for some possibly some questions.
We have some. Don't worry. We do. Let me read you one that came in the email, and maybe then someone else will want to chime in. Let me remind everybody that you are muted automatically when you came in. If you'd like to share, please use the reactions button at the bottom. You can give the chief thumbs up if you agree with something that he said, and use the applause one to let us know that you'd like to be recognized. Chief, one person wrote and said, of the 23 deaths to date that occurred in Lincolnwood due to COVID-19, can you tell us, do you know how many were in the Lincolnwood nursing homes?
I don't have an exact number. I can find out and get back to you. We do know that the majority of those, and I'd like to say that those are not, we don't have the term nursing home. It's an assisted living facility.
Thank you.
So I'd rather kind of just distinguish the difference, that a lot of those had taken place as a part of assisted living. But yes, the majority of those, the good news is we have not had a death in Lincolnwood for a couple, I believe 2 weeks now. So that's a good sign that we're making progress.
Absolutely. Another question came in. It said, in the Lincolnwood Connections, it stated that the state of Illinois requires people to wear masks. Yet, walking around the park, I see kids sitting around a picnic table at the shelter, at least 10 of them, not social distancing and no masks. What can we do to enforce the mask requirement?
So, interesting topic. So outside in the public, if you cannot maintain social distancing, masks are required for anybody that's 2 or older, or there's an exception if you have a medical condition that prohibits you from wearing a mask or a face covering. Part of the problem is we have a lot of people that come from the same household or their relatives, and they gather outside as well as gather inside, and it's very hard to distinguish separately who belongs together and who doesn't, and who should have a mask on. If they are underage, my preference would be to ask the parents to try to get their children to comply with the mask covering. But realistically, if you're outside, it's a very hard thing to enforce, because outside you're not required to wear a mask, like I said, unless you are less than 6 feet in social distancing. But if you're from the same household, you're not wearing a mask inside either. So it's a very gray area, and it's not something that, I mean, we as police officers could, if we get a call, approach and say, hey, you really should be wearing a mask. But realistically, it's not something I would feel comfortable taking enforcement action on, because there are so many variables that may apply in a particular situation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go with another. Oh, no, I don't see any hands up. I'm going to go with another question. What practices are currently in place in Lincolnwood that you think need to be changed in our policing?
I think just keeping up with training. One thing that frankly, the COVID-19 pandemic has hurt training. I mean, we've been basically in-person training has been suspended. And that training, I mean, the firearms training, in-person firearms training has not been taking place. We haven't been able to send anybody to class. Classes have been suspended. Our particular firearms range is not functional right now. So we don't have that ability, even one-on-one, to get officers proficient in the use of firearms. And I feel that it's a very, very important part of training that needs to be addressed. We will catch up with it, obviously, when things open up a little better. We have an agreement with Skokie. We're working on an agreement with another agency to let us shoot. Logistically, it makes it a little bit difficult when it's not in our own facility. But I feel that firearms training, proficiency in firearms training and use of force as it relates to deadly force, it's very, very important. I kind of look at any type of police physical training as something that it's really like playing a sport. The more you train, the better you are, and then there's much of a less risk of making a mistake. So I think that that's something we need to work on in terms of training. But when we do firearms training, we also do that. We also make sure officers understand the use of force policy very, very well. One thing we were able to do, and I believe, I don't want to call out Trustee Sargon, but we had, for the first time ever, we had a system in place where we do it through our Northeast Multi-Regional Training, where we were able to get a shoot, don't shoot scenario system on premise, where officers had 2 weeks to go through the various scenarios. And I know the trustee was invited to take place in that. And I think it really gives, obviously officers, they have to think through and talk through the scenarios, which really, really do help. But I think it's also important to have some of the, I was happy to see one of the trustees involved, because they understand how quick some of the decisions are that could be, that could involve deadly force. And having that exposure really, really helped us. And I just wanted to mention that, because I think not only firearms training itself with using an actual firearm, but going through scenarios where it's more of a simulator type system is very, very helpful. It allows officers to articulate, because using force or choosing not to use force, being able to talk, de-escalate, talk through a scenario, it really does make a difference. Some people are very adaptable to conversation, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that the officers converse with who they're dealing with. And the goal is not to use any force. We want people to comply. That is the ultimate goal. And no officer I know wants to have to use force because, it's a very traumatic experience, depending on what it is, and things happen and evolve very quickly. But we want to make sure our officers are properly trained to do that if they have to.
Can you talk to us more about that training? I pretty much, when I think of police, I hope that they're trained in using firearms and driving in ways that I would never dare drive. And, I expect those things. What seems to be really at the forefront of a lot of our minds today is thinking about how police officers are called on, in our country anyway, for domestic violence, for somebody's too drunk, somebody's, like things that you don't even really think about. Like how does a police officer get trained to deal with it? My kid, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, let me explain. During the hiring process, we obviously try to pick the best candidate. There's a written testing process. There obviously is a background investigation. But one thing we recently did I think hiring is the first step to ensuring we get a properly trained officer. So part of that process, we just recently updated our Board of Fire and Police Commission rules. And part of that process, we established after the written exam, we are going to have a panel exam within the police department before they move on for a final oral exam before the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. So this basically takes place, we added another layer of an interview internally before they go on and get placed on the final eligibility list. And then once they're placed on the final eligibility list, they obviously have to do they have to pass a extensive background investigation. They also have to pass a medical, and then they also have to pass a drug screening and a polygraph exam. So there's extensive layers that we use to screen out potential bad candidates through the system. But once we do hire somebody, we currently use the Chicago Police Academy. We have a recruit now that was, academy classes were delayed because of the pandemic, but that recruit has started back in the police academy. He was in the academy for 10 weeks when they suspended training. He is now back in the academy. We use Chicago Police Academy because they actually do have a very robust training program for the metropolitan suburban area. Their academy is 22 weeks long. So they get actually extra training that is above and beyond what the state mandates. Currently, most police academies outside of Chicago that meet the state requirements roughly have about a 14 to 15 week program. We enjoy having those extra weeks that we feel are beneficial to making that officer more well-rounded, more exposed to techniques used in training for getting them ready for field duty. And then after that, we have officers are required to do a field training program with a field training officer. They switch officers several times during the program, but that program is 18 weeks long.
I'm sorry for interrupting. How much of that are they learning? Like when you're screening, is racism something that you're listening for in these people? We have a really diverse community. We do so many languages that are spoken and so many customs and ways of being and ways of behaving in public, and so much diversity. Is that kind of sensitivity something that's front and center?
It is. We prefer to use the term, we try to screen out people for bias when we ask questions. I'm not going to divulge some of the questions because we're obviously recorded, but the specific question, but we do look for we ask a lot of different questions of candidates to try to screen out if they do have some type of bias before we potentially hire them for a position. And we also do try to recruit and people that come from a diverse background. I mean, one of the first things I learned when I came from Evanston or even worked in Evanston was we always had the goal of trying to mirror the community we represent with the officers. And luckily, even when a lot of media was looking into this after Ferguson, they wanted to see, do the officers that are hired by the police department mirror the community? And this was something that was, I came from a culture in Evanston where this was something we always tried to do. And that is something that when I came here, I'm very concerned about. And, although we do have we have a strict placement on screening people, and sometimes people fall within the list, and we obviously hire people in a certain numerical order. But when we do interview them, the oral interview does have a lot of weight towards their background, and utilizing somebody that has representation within the community is something that we really have to have. People want to talk to officers they feel comfortable with,
Right.
and so having that diverse police force that represents a diverse community, I think is a key to success. I truly believe that, and that's a goal that we've been working towards. And
Thank you.
I think, but I want to be honest, it is a challenge. It is a challenge because your candidate pool is only as good as the people that take the test. So if we can't recruit people to actually take that test, to have those different backgrounds, it makes it harder for the police department to really grab onto those candidates. So that's an ongoing challenge though across this country with recruiting candidates.
Thank you. There's a bunch of questions are coming in on the chat, so I'm going to switch to the people who are actually here present. Somebody said, I didn't have a chance to send a question. My concern is the police union. Is there one affecting this village? I ask this especially with the responses of the unions I've seen in the news recently.
So yeah, I mean, there's collective bargaining agreements exist in most villages or cities. In Lincolnwood, the collective bargaining agreement, which is represented by the Fraternal Order of Police, Illinois Labor Council, they represent the police officers of Lincolnwood. They don't represent, though, we do not have a union that represents our sergeants or lieutenants. They're not represented. They are non-union personnel. So that being said, I'm very on top of reading through the collective bargaining agreement, making sure there are proper parameters within the collective bargaining agreement that allow management to exercise, certain rights that we need to have to make sure police officers are doing their job. I feel that we do have that. I don't feel that there's any issue with our collective bargaining agreement other than allowing them due process if there was to be an issue regarding behavior. All police officers are allowed that due process. They're also protected under the Illinois Peace Officers Bill of Rights Act for formal investigations. So not to try to go off track, but generally when police officers get complaints, there's two types. There's formal and informal. Formal is defined of if you are subject to potential discipline of more than 3 days up to and including termination. Informal would be an incident where it's investigated, they may have done something wrong, but it's not egregious, and they may be seeking discipline. Could be anywhere from 3 days or less. Could be as much as could be just an oral reprimand, so to speak. But that there is an Illinois law in place that we have to define where that cutoff is between formal and informal. But I feel we have good parameters in place, not only by policy, by our Board of Fire and Police Commission rules, and our collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you. There's another question. With all the Black Lives Matters events, police departments have been presenting new forms of training regarding how to treat persons that they are confronting. Has Lincolnwood Police addressed these matters specifically?
We actually have. When I first became chief here, we had partnered with a grant from the Anti-Defamation League. And the reason I went with the Anti-Defamation League was because because Lincolnwood has such a diverse community, they offered a non-bias, implicit bias training for really all nationalities, religions. They really gave us kind of a global look at implicit bias, not specific to one race, but really everybody. And I have to say, initially, I was concerned how the officers were going to react, but they really took it very well. And we all went through scenarios together with the trainers, and it really, I found it to be really good because it was done on a grant. We didn't have to pay for it. They offered this grant, and it was really successful. And they've done work for the Chicago Police Department. They've done work for the Highland Park Police Department. I know they've done, and I still have a very good relationship with the representative from the Anti-Defamation League. I've attended, back when we could go to breakfast together, I would go to breakfast talks about just making sure that we are staying on top of any type of implicit bias or hatred that may be developing in and around the Chicago area, because they are good about sharing that kind of information also.
And is it just, the next question was, kind of goes off of that, is that just at the initial, like, is that, okay, you did that and now it's over? Or how often do you plan to reinforce that training especially as the force changes?
Yeah, so I mean, the state mandates certain training that we have to have regarding that implicit bias. So we, every 3 years is what we try to do. So we will be looking at doing some more. I'm not, when it comes to implicit bias training, I'm more of a fan of in-person training than trying to do something online. There has been a lot of things that allow us to do mandates online, but my preference with certain topics, in-person training. But I realize that some of that is, our hands are tied until we kind of get past, obviously, phase 4. Some more things will open up, and then eventually, once we get to phase 5, things should be back to normal in regards to training. But the good news is that we know that I sit on the Northeast Multi-Regional Training Board for Directors, and we know that the state of Illinois has not cut our budget. They gave them the funding that they need. We just don't know how that funding is going to be split up yet between the training units. But we're hoping that we will get as much funding as we need to get people trained. One training, though, that we have been pushing, and we have the vast majority of our officers are certified in crisis intervention training. They have the 40-hour certification as a crisis intervention officer, which has really, really helped in terms of de-escalation and dealing with mental health calls. We mandate that there was a policy we implemented that we are required, the supervisors are required when officers work, they list their specialty, and one of those specialties obviously is crisis intervention. So if a call comes out that may have a mental health angle to it, could be really any type of call, disturbance, domestic disturbance, somebody acting out. If there appears to be mental health related call, an officer has to be dispatched that is trained if they're working.
What's the role of the village social worker in situations like that? I know we have a part-time social worker. Is she involved just in case management, or does she ever get involved in these kind of calls?
No, she's not a first responder. So we have a part-time social worker. So that does limit us there, the fact that she is part-time, but she's very good. There is a lot of follow-up that is required after the fact. So once the police do respond on those calls that are maybe, could be elderly assistance, could be potential abuse, could be domestic follow-up, orders of protection, making sure victims' rights are adhered to regarding any type of crime that where we want to make sure that those rights are maintained. The social worker gets forwarded those reports and does follow-up contact. The social worker also deals with death notifications, other instances where there may be, I know that the social worker was involved with trying to assist with getting food delivery, people identified for food delivery during the pandemic for senior citizens. So it's kind of a well-rounded approach. But again, the social worker is part-time. And so a lot of her day is a lot of phone call follow-ups. Sometimes there are in-person visits, but that's not always the case. And if it's any potential for like what's happening at the moment, police officers have to do that just because of the safety issue.
This seems like a really good place to insert a quick commercial for the village social worker. We've worked, Lincolnwood Together has the Harris Levitt Angel Fund is a sort of a subsidiary. And the Harris Levitt Memorial Angel Fund is a fund that is created by the residents of Lincolnwood for residents of Lincolnwood in financial crisis. Paula has been putting in the chat, anybody who'd like to make a contribution, it's a tax-deductible contribution to the fund. We have been honored to work with Elise, who's the village social worker. We've distributed hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to people in crisis who have either food shortage, we've paid utility bills. We're doing what we can because we have so many wonderful neighbors who are in a position to give. We don't always realize that we have so many neighbors that are in need. I mean, especially, you think Lincolnwood, but we really do. So it's wonderful. And we appreciate that. And thanks, Chief. That was a brief commercial interruption.
That's okay. Sometimes I need to take a breath in between talking. I'm trying to get a lot out, but.
The next question was, are there any current civil rights violation lawsuits against the village at this time that you're aware of?
No, I don't believe there's any. I'm trying to think there. I believe we have litigation going on Potentially with one person, but I'm not, I haven't had an update in months on it, so I'm not sure where it stands.
Thank you. The next question was, how big is the Lincolnwood Police Force and what are the different positions?
So we have currently we have 33 sworn positions. That includes myself. And then we also have civilian staff. So I'll just try to break down the sworn staff and then I'll go into the civilian staff. So we have a chief, obviously myself. I have a deputy chief that oversees daily operations. Under the deputy chief, we have our records unit, and then we also have the rest of the department where we have, like I said, right now we're doing 12-hour shifts, and that was implemented because of the COVID-19 issue. We're transitioning out of that. We will go back to a traditional 3-watch system. So officers will work 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night, and then 11 at night to 7 in the morning. That switch will take place a week from Monday. You know, unless something happens where we have to feel the need to keep people and restrict that movement. But the plan is, I like to do things, I phase things in not all at once, and I kind of like to do the same thing going out. So like as we change phases for the COVID, as we go to phase 4, we're going to transition back to the 8-hour shifts. We have a detective unit where we have 3 detectives and we have a detective sergeant. That's the unit that obviously handles any type of follow-up investigations or major crimes. They do stay fairly busy in terms of following up on domestic batteries, thefts, car burglaries. We have had, our crime rate actually has been fairly stable this year. Last year we saw probably one of the biggest reductions in crime we've seen within the village, which was nice. So we saw a little bit of an uptick towards the end of the year, but we were able to manage it well with personnel. Again, we have 33 sworn. One of those officers is at the academy, and we generally try to balance each shift with approximately 8 officers. So, and then we have supervisors. Obviously, each shift has a sergeant and a lieutenant. So there's 3 lieutenants total, 4 sergeants total. In addition, as I said, the deputy chief and myself. We have 2 records clerks. We have an IT specialist on hand to handle any technical issues. We do have a lot of information systems through the police department. It's a very robust topic because there's just so many moving parts between our car cameras, our car computers, our dispatch center, our records management, and in our in-house camera system. I'd like to say there's always technical issues that seem to evolve. With the more technology you have, the more troubleshooting seems to arise. And then we have our part-time social worker. And then we have our executive secretary who works, basically does all the payroll and everything else for myself and manages the timekeeping and really just kind of is the central repository of handling everything for the police department administratively. So, and I have to say, as long as you're asking, I'm giving her a shout out because she's a 43-year employee of the village, Mary Liss, and I have to say, after 43 years, comes to work and works harder than anybody I know. So I'm just going to throw that out there because she deserves it. She probably wouldn't be happy that I'm saying that, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah, she's amazing. Anybody who's lived in Lincolnwood knows that she's amazing. She
really is. So, and she makes my job much, much easier. So that's really kind of how the department lays out. You know, we are obviously, we don't have much extra staff to have any type of specialized assignments other than the detectives. So we split up a lot of administrative duties and tasks amongst the supervisors. So we have a supervisor that's assigned to run the field training program, a supervisor that's assigned to run the property room and evidence. We have another one that oversees the evidence technician program. We have another supervisor that oversees our traffic enforcement program. And also part of that, they do our traffic grant enforcement, which is we get grant money from the state where we can do extra enforcement for whether it's DUIs or speed enforcement. We also have that sergeant also oversees our truck enforcement program, which that's something that got implemented when I came here because we do have a lot of trucks that do go through overweight trucks, oversized trucks that do travel through the village. And we felt that that was an important part of safety for the motorists, that trucks are not traveling in excess of their limit if they're not properly permitted. So that's that we felt that added to the safety of the village. I mean, we have obviously with the between the IDOT roads and the one Cook County road within the village, there is a lot of traffic that travels through the village. I'm sure most people here have seen that now with things relaxing, with people not staying as home that much, traffic is starting to grow back to its closer to normal amounts. So with that being said, the more people are also driving a little bit, not obeying the traffic laws as well as they should. So I feel our presence really, really needs to be highly visible and taking action when we need to deter or curb any type of erratic driving from people on the roadways. I mean, safety is our goal across the board, whether it's traffic safety or crime safety. To me, they're equally as important, because if you get hurt from a crime or you get hurt from a crash, you're still getting hurt.
Yeah. Chief, I know I've heard at board meetings sometimes when they talk about crime at the mall. What kinds of calls? I apologize. I don't read the police blotter. I think that is public.
That's okay.
If you could just
it is.
tell us a little bit.
So I encourage people too, also, for those of you that do follow our Twitter, we do post the weekly crime bulletin, so people can obviously see what crimes are reported within the village on a weekly basis. So that's something that as a public you're entitled to, and we do produce that document. We also have a online platform to look at where we share with, just so you can, if you had an interest on knowing how many traffic crashes have occurred in this area of the village, you can actually pull that up and look at it. Public information. So I really think it's important for the public to know that. But focusing on the town center, obviously the town center was closed for a little bit. It's starting to get back to some type of normalcy. But most often, the issues that take place at the mall are retail theft. Sometimes we have disturbances within the mall. And then unfortunately, we have, with the Kimball Avenue bus coming up from the city, we've experienced some unfortunate drug overdoses from heroin. So we've had numerous calls where the fire department and also police respond to deploy Narcan and try to counteract that overdose. Most often, those individuals are revived and transported to the hospital for treatment. We've been very successful with deploying the Narcan is the brand name, naloxone is the generic name of the counter drug to reduce the risk of bringing somebody out of an overdose reaction to heroin, and mixed usually with fentanyl. We have deployed it quite often. Every officer's trained in it. We belong to a grant program that provides those doses for us free of charge, so we can respond and administer those doses.
Well,
so I hate to say that is a legitimate issue at the mall, and it's troubling, but it's something we obviously have to deal with.
And around the village?
I'm sorry?
And like the kinds of calls that you get around the village?
Kinds of calls around the village vary. We do get domestic disturbances. I think we've seen a little bit of an uptick of domestic disturbances because of the stay-at-home order. We kind of expected that. That was it's kind of a national trend. We do get, occasionally we'll get what's considered a ruse burglary, where people target elderly and try to talk their way into a house and basically distract the elderly resident and go in and commit a theft within, looking for jewelry and goods. That occasionally does happen. Most often, though, our most frequent crime within the village is people going into unlocked cars and taking belongings. That's probably the most common. Theft is by far the driving number of the village crime. And
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Most often those crimes are, as I said, retail theft or an unlocked car.
I think there's a few questions that kind of go together here, so I'm going to throw them all and let you answer.
Sure.
The first question was, where do I see the police blotter? That's one. Another is, who decides whether to press charges at the mall for retail theft? Who determines the outcome of shoplifting? And I think I'm sorry, two people wrote that at the exact same time. They wrote the same. Okay.
So the store would be the victim, so the agent of the store. So if it's, for an example, such and such store, the employee that works for that store, they would be the complainant. So we do have a policy though, that if somebody does not, if they're not a repeat offender and the theft of the goods is less than $100, they would get a local ordinance ticket for retail theft and appear before the administrative adjudication. So it's handled all on a local ordinance. It does not generate a criminal record for that individual. So it is basically a kind of a differential way of not sending them to criminal court, and they don't get their fingerprints taken. It's processed in a civil matter, basically. But if it did meet the criteria for a criminal offense, and sometimes, you know, a lot of times they do, they would be arrested and charged criminally. They would appear in court in Skokie, but the complainant, whether it's through our administrative adjudication or criminal courts, it would be the store employee would be the one signing the complaint.
Thank you. And where to see the police blotter?
So the police blotter, if you go to our Twitter, we do post it weekly. I do believe we were posting it on the web page, but I have to check to see if that's still up and running, because we don't have our own web page. We do have, there's a section for public safety, and I believe it was getting posted there, but I don't want to say it's for sure there without me double checking. So, but I know that we do post it on Twitter. So if you go to our Twitter feed at Lincolnwood PD, you will be able to see our posting for the blotter.
Excellent. Let me remind everybody, if the chief says something that you appreciate, feel free to go to that reactions button at the bottom and give him thumbs up. And if you have a question, I'm not sure I can see all the pages, so if I haven't paid attention to you, then, you know, unmute yourself and let me know. But you can go to the reactions and use the applause to raise your hand. There goes some thumbs up. Appreciate that. Chief, there was another question that came in. It's a little sensitive.
Okay.
Through the email, and that was, the person said, I've heard a lot of stories of unpleasant interactions in Skokie between residents and the police. Skokie is so close to Lincolnwood at so many points. Therefore, our residents probably interact with their police, or our family and friends could be profiled in Skokie coming to Lincolnwood. So I'd like to know, do the police departments in Lincolnwood and Skokie communicate about how they police? Are there consistent policies in Niles Township? If not, how can we start that?
So I can tell you that I know the chief of Skokie Police very well, Tony Scarpelli. I actually just spoke with him today. As a matter of fact, we exchanged emails. We have a very good working relationship with Skokie. They're a much bigger department. They're also a much busier municipality than Lincolnwood. We do have a good working relationship with them, and I know that they do have a very I can't speak for what was heard in terms of any consternation between the community and Skokie Police. I'm not aware of that, but I know that I know the chief, and I know how he believes in policing, and he believes in policing just like I do, that we have to police professionally, abide by our policies, and make sure that we're giving professional service and treating everybody fairly, and abiding by the law, and making sure that we also protect everybody's rights. So I could pass that comment that you're sharing with me on to him, but I don't know specifically of any instances between negative instances between Skokie Police Department and residents of Lincolnwood and or Skokie.
Thank you. If you mentioned that while chokeholds are banned, what are the guidelines for use of force? So
use of force is a very broad topic, because we define force, and then we also look at what's deadly force. So I mean, we always want to make sure that our force is justifiable, and there's a lot of different components that go around. I mean, we want to make sure we're acting reasonably. We are also trying to make sure that we've exercised as much judgment as possible to not have to go to physical force. But I say use of force is a very dynamic issue. It can evolve very quickly. We try to have officers, utilize their skills, their body language, their verbal skills to try to avoid using force. But oftentimes, sometimes the force, we have to jump to force right away, because we may arrive on a call and somebody may be physically harming another person, or we may arrive on a call and they're fighting with maybe the security guard because they're getting stopped for retail theft, and we have to go physically take them into custody. it's a very, like I said, it's a very broad topic, but we want to ensure that officers act and utilize all their tools in their toolbox to make sure they're making justifiable actions, and they can also do it legally and within our policy. If there's somebody that has particularly wants to see our use of force policy, I have no issue sharing that. Please email me and I'll be more than happy to share that with whoever.
Thank you. Another question came, do you make any use of the cameras that some people have on their doorbells?
So what we do is, specifically Ring, we are a partner agency with Ring, as many other law enforcement agencies are in the Chicago area. We cannot go on to a Ring camera and just look at it. We don't have that ability. What we do though is, if there is a crime in a neighborhood, and when I say a crime, I don't mean, it has to be a legitimate crime. We can send a request with a time frame of when that crime occurred and ask residents who have a Ring camera to review their footage themselves. And if they see something that looks like it may be beneficial or be related to what we're looking for in terms of solving that crime, then they can share that with us. So that's really how the system works. We usually send something out, and then people that are subscribed to Ring will get a notification from the police department and say, hey, the police had, let's say a car burglary occurred in this area between this time frame, and we never give them the exact address. And we just say, can you please review your footage that may result in helping the police locate an offender? And that'll go out. A lot of times we also still, as a part of due diligence, because not everybody does have a Ring camera, we do canvass anytime a crime is reported on the exterior of a street. We do canvass that neighborhood, and we will knock on doors asking somebody if they have a camera system or if they saw anything. A lot of times sometimes the cameras are visible, sometimes they're not. But cameras, not only do we do that for the purposes of trying to solve the case, but the state's attorney's office actually requires us to do that if we do develop a suspect and we're trying to ascertain a charge. That has become a normal protocol for trying to get charges.
Thank you for that as well. I think I'm reading all the questions that I see in the chat. If there's anyone you're here, I'm so happy that so many people are joining us this evening, and I want to be sure, we still have about a half hour left. I want to be sure that you leave satisfied, that you're glad that you came, that you heard what you wanted to hear, or at least the issue that you wanted to hear. So please take this time to take a moment to reflect. If you have a question, this is a good time to either raise your hand or send it over on the chat to be sure that we get it addressed. While people are thinking about that, Chief, I'm trying to formulate a question and I'm having a really hard time. So just bear with me for a second.
That's okay.
But
and I'd also like to say, I put this out at the end, but I'd like to just at least say that, sometimes we get off these conversations and tonight somebody may be like, oh, I wish I would have asked that. Please, Karen, you have my email. You can share that with the group. If somebody wants to send me an email and has a question that they just, thought about later on, because that happens,
yeah.
send the email and I'll get, and a phone number, and I'll be more than happy to call you and we can chat over it. I prefer that. I think it's a good way. Plus, I really, the more people I get to know in the community, the better it is for me.
Great. So this question came in. I think you addressed something similar, but I want to make sure we say it anyway. It said, what type of cultural diversity training is provided, and how is it monitored and audited, and feedback given to officers? And I think that sort of details with what I was trying to put together. Like, I want to ask a question that feels kind of like touchy-feely for asking a police chief. But, like, I have a profession. And when I hear people, like if somebody in my profession gets called up on ethics charges or is caught, like I'm a social worker. And so if I hear about a social worker who's having an inappropriate relationship with a client, it's like, oh, like I hate that. I feel it hurts my heart because I feel like that person's a representative of my profession. And there's been so much going on in the news and so many things being uncovered that the public is outraged about. How is it on the inside among the force itself? Like that, it's got to be rough. And yeah, did I get it out okay?
No, yeah, you totally did, actually. And I could sum it up in a very simple sentence. There is nothing worse, and I'll use the word hate. There's nothing worse that a good cop hates than a bad cop. Nothing worse. I could tell you that factually. Because one, you know, the old adage of, we say, you could have 1,000 attaboys, but one mess up takes away all those 1,000 attaboys. It's the same concept. One bad cop destroys many, 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 many good things that we have done for the millions and millions of incidents and contacts we've had for the good law enforcement.
Yeah.
And it just takes that one bad thing to happen that sets us back. The milestones that we get, they've just been taken away. And frankly, I told my officers, and I want to be very frank about this. I really felt that law enforcement and all first responders, and including the doctors and the nurses, with COVID-19 and us being out there and still responding to calls, and I really felt, I'm like, wow, people are really, they're happy. They're really giving us positive attention. And then one bad thing happens, and not only did we lose, that credit, we lost a lot more.
Well,
and,
it's not one bad thing. That's the problem. The problem is it's not one bad thing. And the question that comes to mind, and I don't want you to have to speak for all police everywhere from the beginning of time, but what can you tell us about police culture? Why don't the good guys report the bad guys? Like, that's so damaging.
I can't say that they're not reporting the bad guys, but it depends on what the complaint is, how it's investigated, and is it sustained, and is there discipline taken, and is the discipline not challenged, or if it is challenged, is the officer held accountable under that discipline, or is it reversed and they have to give the officer back his job, or they decide not to give him discipline? I mean, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of different factors, Karen.
That'd be really frustrating.
There's a lot of moving parts, and I can't make and dissect every incident that's happened nationally, because we all watch the news and we see what's going on, and we see all these things reported. But unless I get all the facts, and I mean all the facts, which I don't know that everybody has all the facts regarding anything, because some of it's protected information. So it's very hard to make. I always say to make a fully educated decision, I have to know everything, and that doesn't mean that in terms of discipline, we don't have to know everything. Sometimes there's just enough to take action as a law enforcement executive to get somebody off at the police department. Criminally charge somebody is a whole nother level. Obviously, we look at, in terms of disciplining officers, we have to have a preponderance of evidence. Criminal is obviously proof beyond a reasonable doubt in terms of getting a conviction. So those are all things that, and I just, I want to remember that, and I think I tell this to the public with most sincerity, is that, just because it's an officer and he did something wrong, that officer has constitutional rights just like everybody else, and we don't want to violate his rights, and we sure don't want to violate any person's rights that we have to deal with. We protect the Constitution for everybody, and I just want to, this doesn't have anything to do with whether we made a decision that somebody did something wrong, because a lot of officers that are bad do make bad decisions, and they should be held accountable. But that doesn't mean that we violate due process or make prejudgments to get satisfaction. We have to do it the right way. We have to do it lawfully. Just like how we police, we have to do it lawfully in the right way. Things get reviewed by the state's attorney. They decide if there's enough for criminal charges. Some places take it to a grand jury to determine if there's enough for charges. The process, we just want to follow the Constitution. That's to me most important. That's the most important guideline.
We have another question that I think is also very heavy and very challenging. So before we go to that one, let me ask you this one. There are a couple of intersections I feel could be made safer. Who do I speak to?
So I guess it would depend on, you could speak to me. I guess it depends on what those intersections are. Some of those intersections are controlled by the village. Some of the intersections are controlled by Illinois Department of Transportation, or possibly the Cook County Highway Authority. So it really depends on what those intersections are and what the complaint is. And we have worked with IDOT before, and we have a traffic commission, and we would do traffic studies and have the traffic commission opine on and make a determination based a lot of times based on staff's recommendation or not, to change certain, whether it's an intersection or could be a stop sign, a yield sign, traffic control. Those are things that, we do examine, and that's our job within the village to do that. I work very closely with the Public Works Department when we do have to deal with possibly changing signage or markings on the street. We do look at that. So that's just something that's available. I would hope that that person can follow up with me and let me know what the issues are, and we'll try to address them.
Great. I will send out a follow-up with your email, but I don't have everybody who's on this call. I don't believe you're on our email list. Please send me your email address. You can send it privately in the chat, but I would like to be able to add you to our email list, and then you'll get the chief's email from us. Chief, I'm not sure if this question is more for you or for Trustee Sargon, but it says, does Lincolnwood Police or the village have a statement of position statement on systemic racism issues in the police department? Or I'm assuming, or in the village. Do we have a statement on racism?
Would Trustee Sargon, you want me to answer that? If you like, I'm sorry, you're muted.
I feel like
if you can please address that.
Sure. So we collectively, Karen, myself, the village manager, Anne Marie Gora, and the mayor collectively distributed a statement over a week ago, and I believe the mayor also read it last night at the village board meeting that discussed our position on racism and the issues regarding that racism will not be tolerated within the Lincolnwood Police Department. It's much more expansive than that. But I encourage, it is posted on our village website, and I encourage everybody to look at that statement, because I believe it is a very important statement from the village on how we position ourselves regarding how we don't tolerate racism.
Okay, here comes that difficult question. I'm concerned about something I heard for the first time today. It has to do with police having their own social media, which is openly white supremacist and racist. What would happen if you found out that your officers participated in this type of social media?
They would be subject to discipline. We do have a social media policy that it applies to officers. The one thing I'd like to mention, though, is depending on what is stated and what they state, some things do have First Amendment protection and other things don't. So I would have to know exactly who it was and what was said.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, 1 second, I'm scrolling here. I think I addressed this a little bit, but they said, we often hear of police officers who have many complaints on their records. Why do departments keep officers with bias or violence problems?
I think it depends on the issues. Some issues are not as straightforward as they seem. I think it depends on how it's investigated. Some places have very good investigative process for complaints. Some don't. That's probably my best answer for that. But tracking the officer, and officers are, if an officer is doing their job, that doesn't mean that they're not going to get a complaint. If they're doing it the right way, they could potentially still get a complaint. But it's our job to make sure that we investigate it fully, and that if there is an infraction, that we document it. And some offenses are, like I said, they could be informal or they could be formal. Some offenses are just in and of itself, one time could be allowing us to fire an officer. They could have multiple offenses. Sometimes officers, maybe just their demeanor is bad. Eventually they'll work themselves up to potentially a formal complaint, but sometimes it just requires counseling. It's like anything, progressive discipline. We try to, when we discipline an officer, depending on what level it is, we try to give them training and counseling before we take punitive action, which is suspension.
Got it. Here's one that should be easy. Is the village hall open now? How are we supposed to purchase an auto sticker for Lincolnwood?
You can. The village hall is open at 9 to 1, and they are open. They kind of did a little more of a softer opening, but and I would just like to tell people too, if you do go to the village hall, the side you're used to going in on, which is on the finance side, That's the entrance, and then they're having everybody exit out towards the community center, the far door. So you actually walk past, after you go to finance, you would walk past the village manager's office and exit out that door towards the community center. That way we're trying to keep the flow of people coming in, keeping them socially distanced, also requiring a face covering, and then sending them out away from other people that potentially they avoid basically a crisscross in their paths.
Great. There was a follow-up question to the one about.
Sorry, if I can just quickly add too, we are recommending people to go online to purchase the stickers, and we've also extended the deadline through September to give people more time to get their vehicle stickers.
So they don't get mailed out? There's no option for mailing them out like in Skokie?
You can still, yeah, you can still mail them out. That's still an option. I just wanted to let people know that if you're not comfortable going in or going through mailing, you can do it online. And you have more time to go in. We've extended it through September, the deadline to get the sticker.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Going back, there was a question about when you responded about the hate groups online, Chief, there was a follow-up. Could you please clarify what does not have First Amendment protection and what does regarding racist comments?
Well, I think it would depend on what the comment is. I mean, if an officer is saying something that's hatred driven, specifically very undistinguishable, if they make a comment that maybe could be interpreted as racist as opposed to straight out racism, that's obviously makes it a little more complicated than if it's just straight up racism. We could take disciplinary action in terms of their comment. We'd also have to be able to identify them, and that account. I mean, I would hope that no officers have like fictitious accounts and are not doing something subversively. I am not aware of any of that. I believe, I really don't, I have not been made aware of that within the Lincolnwood Police Department. If somebody is aware of that here, I would sure solicit and want to know that. But I don't believe that that's taking place here.
Thank you. Next question. A couple of people in Lincolnwood who got COVID-19, I know a couple of people in Lincolnwood who got the COVID-19 virus. Do you know the present amount of people who tested positive in our village?
My last recollection, I believe it was about, I think we were up to about 164 total positive, but that time frame was from when testing was being revealed, mid-March, I believe. So obviously a lot of people have recovered from that. So I'm not sure active cases. We unfortunately don't get that shared information from the health department on what's active, what's not. We only know by the village how many cases have tested positive and how many tests have been given to village residents. And that information, if anybody's curious, you can go to either the Illinois Department of Public Health website, or you can go to the Cook County Department of Public Health website, and there's a link to look at that specific information, either by zip code or by municipality.
Thank you. We have on the call this evening, we have a visitor from Skokie who I call my favorite scientist, and she just posted the link. So anybody who wants to just click on that, it'll take you right over to the Department of Public Health site. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions or comments? Are you getting, we're so lucky to have a chief of police who would meet with us. Anybody, any other questions or comments that you want to ask with the chief, or you want to tell him?
And please, like I said, email me if you can't remember, and I'll try to get the best answer for you. I mean, I'm shooting from the hip tonight in terms of questions and answers, so I'm hoping I'm giving everybody the most accurate information. But if there's a follow-up question, please let me know. I really think it's important for the public to know not only myself but the officers that represent the village, because that's our job. Our job is to serve the village and have a great relationship with the residents, and I feel we do. And it's a pleasure that Karen, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to this.
I'm so happy to hear. I have a couple of people have their hands up. It looks like Lydia. Lydia, can you unmute yourself if you want to make a comment, please?
Just want to say thank you. During this time, we still have police presence in our neighborhood, and it's wonderful to see that we're out there and visible to the neighbors and waving hello, and it just feels very good and comforting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for, I appreciate hearing that, because I've told my officers at the roll calls, I said, now is the most important time to engage the public and be out there and be seen and talk to the residents. So thank you.
I'm getting one right now, another comment, 1 second. It says, "Hi Chief, thank you for taking the time to address our community. With everything going on, it's my understanding that if you have one good cop and one bad cop, then you really have two bad cops. It seems like it's not enough to just be a good cop anymore. What I want to know is what you and the police department are doing to actively counteract the proliferation of bad cop activity. Thank you. I have nothing but respect for you and our police department."
Well, thank you for the compliment, and I can address and say that I talk regularly with our supervisors in the field to ensure that our officers here in Lincolnwood are properly supervised and that their actions are, I don't want to say overly scrutinized, but scrutinized to the point to make sure that we are doing everything lawful and we are performing the best way we can for the residents. Oversight, policing oversight has to happen, and it has to happen from just above the level of an officer to including the officer themselves. And if something were to happen, even if a supervisor wasn't there, if another officer is there and they see something that's wrong, need to know about it. And I can give you an example. I can't go into details, but we had an incident where a supervisor observed an officer didn't have the best demeanor when they were dealing with somebody they were stopping. This is quite some time ago, but the officer was disciplined. That's the supervisor was doing their job by reviewing the video, and I require my supervisors to do regular video checks of officers. They do random checks to make sure that officers are engaging the public properly. And the supervisor noticed something that was inappropriate, and it was dealt with. And that's
invaluable. That's so incredibly wonderful to hear, because what you're addressing in my mind is the culture. There are certain things that, you can give somebody a script and say you have to say these words, but you can't force them to mean it, and when you have a culture where the expectation is to treat people well and to be respectful and to have that professional demeanor, that means the world. Little mistakes can happen when you've got that going on, so that's wonderful to hear.
And you know what, police, just like anybody else, police officers are human, and we're human. So people sometimes say things they don't mean. Some are acceptable, some are not. Some need action, and they have an obligation to be professional, and they have to. Sometimes it's hard, but you have to check any of your issues at the door when you come to work, and sometimes it's hard. But the one thing I do want to talk about, though, is when I came here just over 2 years ago, I wanted to make sure we had a system in place for officers that may be stressed out or may have issues. And peer support amongst law enforcement has become hugely successful. When the days when I first became a policeman, basically there was no, you weren't like, oh, you want to go talk to the EAP or talk to the counselor. That was, they would tell you, if you got an issue, go talk to somebody who cares, or, work it out when you have a drink at the bar.
Yeah.
Those days are over. Those days, some officers may get together and have a beer together and talk about and just decompress, which is okay, because we're all human. We all decompress in different kind of ways. Accountants do the same thing. But my point is that we have joined a regional peer support network. We sent 4 officers within the department to peer support training, and they reach out to officers every once in a while, say, hey, how you doing? You could talk. Their conference calls with each other are confidential. They don't keep any records. And then there's also professional referrals on this network that we've joined with other police departments, and this network has gone national now, to have professional help that your insurance can cover if you need to go to counseling. I think like I said, we're all human. We all have breaking points. We all have triggers. The idea is to recognize it ahead of time and get it taken care of.
That is so great. That is so great to hear. Got a couple more compliments for you. One person said, thanks for doing a great job. Another person said, I'm pleased that your department is meeting so much of the 8 can't wait. Another person did have a question. And this is hard with social distancing, does the police department have any community engagement events planned? Are we going to have a big Zoom party with the police?
Yeah, so that's a good question, though. I appreciate it. So, we did have National Night Out, which we started when I got here. We were able to do 2 National Nights Out. We had one scheduled for August this year. It's not going to happen. But the one thing is that, we have to keep an eye on it, but National Night Out has moved the date to the first Tuesday in October. We used to be the first Tuesday in August. So we're waiting to see that. I can't say that for sure that's going to happen, but that's probably the closest police engagement outing that I could look forward to. I'm hoping we can have it, but I got to just kind of see where everything goes with the governor's recommendations and the Illinois Department of Public Health recommendation. So it's either way, though. I think maybe we'll just do some more Zoom calls with you, Karen. You can organize them.
I would love to do that. Maybe we can even get the village to support us in doing that. You never know. Miracles happen. The next one is, thank you very much for sharing your time with the community. Some more appreciation for you. Atur, you're literally raising your hand, Atur.
Add that typically, I think Chief forgot to mention, we also have Coffee with the Cop events. We have 2 a year. But again, with the social distancing and COVID, I think those are put on hold, but they have them annually twice a year. So people who are interested in more engagement events with our officers, look for those events in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Trustee Sargon. I hope we can have one sooner than later.
There is one more comment here. It says, there was an interview last week with the author of White Fragility. She was interviewed by an African-American teacher from Evanston High School. I highly recommend that everyone who has concerns about racism to listen to it. I would very much appreciate you, Chief Parrott, if you could watch it also. So maybe whoever,
Yes.
maybe this is from Edie. Maybe you can send me the link and I can send it on, or you can send the link directly to the chief.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you.
There
Yeah,
it is. There's the link.
I'll see if I can. I'm assuming I can. Maybe I don't know if I can. Oh no. It's not letting me paste it. It was trying to pull it off.
I'll put it in the email when we send out the notes.
Okay, thanks. I just tried clicking on it to copy it, but it didn't seem to work. But thank you.
Yeah, and let me just clarify. It's so hard to reach people in the community. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am. At one point, we had 36 people on this call, and I am absolutely thrilled because our hands are completely tied. The only way that we can reach people is through our email or on Nextdoor. We really don't get any kind of support from any place that would help us reach the community. And we're trying so hard to do good things. And it's just, I apologize if I was sarcastic a moment ago, but I try so, you have no idea. I work, and how much effort and stress to see, and I'm so thrilled that there's 36 people here. But I got to tell you that I sweat every single one of them. And sometimes we just wish that we could get, share it on your Facebook page, make a comment on Nextdoor. I kept checking on Nextdoor. I would put a post, and within 1 minute, it would be all the way at the bottom, and nobody would see it. And it's somebody selling a chaise lounge, and somebody, is doing something else. And I appreciate all those things. But we really have no way to communicate resident to resident in Lincolnwood. There's no community calendar anywhere. There's no way, there's nothing that the village will do. There's really no way, and I get very frustrated. So I apologize if I was sarcastic a moment ago. And somebody said, thank you for sending it, that's very nice. Somebody said there were 40 people on the call at one point because there were 4 couples. Chief, I hope this won't be the last time. You're a treasure in Lincolnwood. I appreciate so much that you didn't hesitate, and I can't tell you what that means to all of us. I'm going to make one more shameless plug, and then I'm going to invite you to, to close out for us. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to remind you, please send me your email address. You can send it to lincolnwoodtogether@gmail.com, or you can put it in the chat. We want to stay in touch with you. Lincolnwood Together is only doing stuff. We have 3 goals. We want to foster a community that's informed, that's engaged, and that's unified. We have no other political leanings. We have no other leanings of any type, just informed, engaged, and unified. We do have a project of ours. We started a 501c3 of Lincolnwood residents, helping Lincolnwood residents financially who are in crisis. And if you want to make a donation, I've noticed that Paula has been putting the link to the GoFundMe, especially in this time of crisis. We didn't know, I didn't know. I've lived in Lincolnwood since 4th grade. I didn't know that 13% of the kids in Lincoln Hall get either fee reduced or free lunches. 12% in Rutledge Hall and 11% in Todd Hall. I had no idea that 10% of our families, assuming that everybody had kids, it's probably a higher percentage, qualify for assistance. And in a time like this, when so many people have lost their jobs and when so many families can't handle a $400 emergency, and yet we live next door to neighbors who are more than willing to give and who have more than enough to give, we're just trying to make the connection. We're just trying to get the connection so that we can help our neighbors. So if you want to help us with the GoFundMe, that would be awesome. Chief, you've had plenty of time to think about what you're going to say next. I kept talking, right?
No, I really, it's just like I said, it's been a pleasure to talk to everybody, and I thought this was a great way of doing this. Under the times we live in, so I felt very engaged, and I could see everybody's facial expressions too, which is very nice, because you can't always do that when you're talking to a group, but in person. So I just want to thank everybody, and again, please reach out to me if you have any issues that come up or concerns or questions. That's my job, to be here for the community, and I want to make sure that our police department continues to do the best job we can. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here. Really